Good afternoon. This is Nicole Health. I am in the BDAT 1006 data visualization course, and this is going to be the presentation for my final assignment. So the data set that I picked for this assignment was the remote working survey, and this data set and survey was completed by the New South Wales government in Australia. This survey collected data from about 1,500 remote workers in Australia, and there was actually two separate data sources and two separate surveys. So the first one was conducted in 2020 between August and September, and the second one in 2021 between March and April. And the purpose of there's a lot of data in these two surveys. I really wanted to focus on some of the changes that were driven by the pandemic and variances between employees' preferences to work remote versus actual practices, and then also some of the benefits that may have been experienced. So I'm going to get started. The first slide here really, I wanted to show over a period of time really the shift in remote work, and I'm comparing here both remote work preferences from employees to the actual practices. So meaning how much time are they actually spending working remote over a period of time. And how you can read this is because it is percentages here, and you could read this as a percentage of time. And to quantify it a little bit more, if we had to look at it as a 5-day work week, 1 day would represent 20%. And also from the survey data, there is really no data types in this survey. It's just one single record for one response. So what I had to do actually was transform this data in a way to give me time periods. So there were questions asked about specific time periods, and these questions would be: how much time did you spend working remote pre-COVID? How much time would you prefer to work remote pre-COVID? And the same questions asked at these different time periods. So that's how I came up with these time periods, but we can't really dive in too deep on specific time periods alone or create like a trend line because of that reason. But it can give us a really good visual to see the shift over time. So if we start at the beginning, pre-COVID, we put me over there. We look at pre-COVID timing. There were people on average working remote. However, people did want to work a little bit more, about 2 days on average per week. And then of course the pandemic started, and that really surged remote work. This was about the peak that people were spending remote, so about 67%. And actually the actual time spent working remote slightly surpassed employees' preferences. So then as time went along in 2020, we saw that, employers were getting their workplaces ready, having their safety measures put in place, and employees started to return to work on site. However, as we continue along that path, we see that employees, they do increasingly prefer to work remote more than their actual practices. So we see this kind of gap or variance between preferences and practices increase over time. And interestingly enough, that gap, which is about 13%, it's about the same as what it was pre-COVID. However, both of these measures have increased. So what I get out of this is, yes, employers are allowing their associates and adjusting their policies to allow more remote work. However, employees have probably seen some of those benefits, which I'll show later in the presentation, and they want to work more time remote. And just a note here for post-COVID, this kind of data point specifically, it actually represents a combination of responses here. So it could be how much time employees are actually working remote post-COVID and going forward, and as well as what their employer's policy actually allows. So I just wanted to note that. Going to the next slide, my story. So I wanted to continue on looking at that variance in employee preferences and actual practices, but I wanted to focus on the post-pandemic time period. So looking at the trends specifically in different industries and then occupations. So the industries below, they are ranked from highest unfavorability in the variance between preferences and actual practices. And then majority of the industries that are listed here, majority of them on average do prefer to work more time remote, with the highest variance being about 2.5 days. So I do have this color scale here to represent. So if it's the dark blue, it's more of an unfavorable variance, meaning there's employees that would prefer to work more than what they actually are. And then the lighter kind of teal color is more favorable. So we can kind of see there's only 3 industries here where it's a favorable variance. And if we look at what those industries are, mining, a combination of food, agriculture, forestry, those aren't really industries that would have a lot of remote work opportunities anyway. So I'm going to focus on, okay, well, what's the industry that has that highest variance? And if we click on this wholesale trade, we can drill down just a little bit more if we want to focus on the occupations here. So what are the different occupations within this industry? Which of those occupations, I guess, then have those highest variances? So sales workers, technicians and trade workers, managers, professionals. That's about less than what the average was when we looked at that time scale on the last slide there, but 13%. But the highest being sales workers and technicians. And that might make sense with the nature of their job. They might not be able to have those opportunities to work remote. And then we can see how that changes the time chart that I presented earlier on how that shifts. So what's interesting is the peak here before was about 67%, but for this industry in particular, it's actually higher. So those employees got to work remote more than the average, but in actual, that's quite a significant drop. But those preferences have remained high. So it's interesting, there's a lot of different ways to look at the data here and dive in as to maybe what are those occupations and what is driving that. And in the data, there is some insights about like some barriers. I'm not going to go into that. There's so many different ways that you could look into this data. There was about 174 total different columns and questions asked. So there's a lot of data to dive through. Next, I want to talk about some of the benefits that employees had experienced while working remote. And it's broken into kind of 2 different categories here. The first one being on like time savings, and then the second area being on overall well-being. And for the time perspective here, what we noticed is on average, remote workers, they save about, when they're working remote, they save about 1 hour and 7 minutes when they work remote. And they save it on actually preparing and commuting to work. So that's the biggest area where they save a lot of their time. So then where does that time go? Do they allocate it? So that then gets allocated to being able to spend more time with their family or just personal time. They can allocate about, so that's about 42 minutes on average across all industries. And then 20 minutes additional time for any responsibilities they have on care and domestic responsibilities. And what's interesting enough as well, on average, people are spending more time working. So is their productivity isn't actually dropping. They're working just slightly bit more. So on the right here just shows, this is in hours, but I've converted it over here to minutes to just be able to read that a bit more clear. And some of this might not add up exactly just due to rounding. So the next section here was 3 questions, that were asked. And the first one being, I feel better working remote. I'm more active when I work remote. Or I feel better seeing colleagues in person. and they could have responded by either strongly agree, somewhat, either agree or disagree, somewhat, disagree, and then strongly disagree. And when we look at that, if we look at the agree, so strongly and somewhat, it's about 50% of respondents acknowledge that working remote, it did positively contribute to their well-being. So they feel better, they're more active. While only 17%, there is a big chunk here where it's like they don't agree or disagree, but then only about 70% that do not agree with that. However, respondents of the survey, there was similar sentiments about feeling better with seeing colleagues in person. So that conflicts a little bit with these two questions here, which that might suggest that a hybrid model of working remote would be ideal so they could experience all of these benefits. And you could drill down a little bit more here to see, okay, for the people that strongly agree with feeling better when they work from home, is their time, how their time is allocated and reallocated, does that change? Slightly. What I'm curious about is the people who disagree. So that 3%, they don't feel better when they work remote. And what's really interesting with this group here that said strongly disagree, they are working a lot more when they work remote. So on average, there's 18 minutes. And this group was spending 59, almost a whole hour more when they work remote. So they might not have those kind of boundaries set in place, not too sure when to work and when to take that personal time. So just to conclude, some of the key insights I took from this material and all of this data, that there is an increase in demand in working remote, even though there has been some shifts with both employees and employers increasing their work from home preferences and their practices. There is still that variance there, meaning like the employer's policies and the practices, they continue to not match. And to continue on that point, with those discrepancies, most of the industries do have a discrepancy between their employees' desire to work remote and what their actual condition, the reality. So taking away from that, the misalignment, it may prompt employees to seek change. So they got to experience something that they prefer, that they desire, and they might seek change in order to work remote again, to experience that benefit again. So they might transition to another industry, so maybe not the wholesale industry, they might transition to a different industry that offers more remote work. They might transition to a different occupation, maybe in the same industry, has greater remote work opportunities, or they just might completely change their career that's more conducive to remote work. And then finally, we did see some benefits there. We saw that remote work saves time for employees, it does boost personal life focus, and they do maintain their productivity when working from home. So overall, it enhances well-being for over 50% of the respondents. And then what I got out of that was a hybrid remote policy could be used or implemented to optimize all of those advantages. So that concludes my presentation. This is a subject that I really enjoyed studying and diving into. I work full-time myself. I'm part-time college. I have a family with kids, so I really appreciate the days when I get to work from home, because I do save that time commuting, packing my bags and packing my lunch, all that preparation, and I get to be home just a little bit earlier. Maybe I can go out for that walk or that jog before my kids get home from school. I get to spend a little bit more time with them. So this is a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I really enjoyed looking through the data. I wish I could spend a bit more time looking through more of it, because there's a lot of insights that you can get from it. So if you're curious yourself, this is the link here to the raw data. It's from the NSW government. So thank you very much, and have a great day.